Hi, this is Maria Williams back with another video. Today's video is about creating frames with border stamps or any long skinny stamp that you might have. I'm going to use the Delicate Detail Stamp Set, which is a free one that you can earn during celebration, but you can definitely use any stamps you have. Here is the Delicate Detail Stamp Set that you can earn for free by spending $50 or more on Stampin' Up! Products. And then I'm also going to be using this beautiful You stamp set, which comes in 2 boxes, and the Big on Birthdays stamp set. Here's a quick tip for mounting your long stamps straight onto your block. You could just line the stamp up with the grid paper and then just grab your acrylic block and mount the stamp onto it. Or you can take a ruler, place it up against the stamp, and then push the stamp right up against the ruler. Metal ruler works great, but if you don't have that, you could use a plastic one or even a piece of sturdy cardstock, and then pick it up with your acrylic block. To start out, I have some samples of the simplest way that you can create a frame with a border stamp, and that is to simply stamp at 90-degree angles to create a rectangle or a square. I'm not worrying about where they overlap or anything, I'm just stamping them. In this particular example, I did the same thing and just decided to round off the edges of the panel just for a little bit different look. And here's how easy it is to create these. I'm taking a piece of Whisper White cardstock that I have cut down to 4 inches by 4 inches, and I'm carefully lining it up with the lines on my grid paper. Now all I have to do is ink up my stamp and use those grid lines that extend past the edges of my cardstock to line up the stamp. I then turn the paper 90 degrees and stamp the next side, and I repeat it for all 4 sides. In my other sample, I've used the exact same stamp, but upside down, if you will, and I get a very similar frame, but if you notice, the corners are a little bit different. Here's a card that I made using this particular type of frame. I've already gone ahead and stamped the frame in black archival ink onto a 4x4 piece of paper from the Pop of Pink Specialty Designer Series paper pack. I've also die cut a stitched square out of paper from the same pack, and now I'm using the beautiful You stamp set to stamp one of the images onto a slightly smaller square of Whisper White cardstock. I'm going to do a little bit of paper piecing, so I'm taking a piece of paper from the same pack and I'm stamping just the portion that I need, which is the dress. I'm going ahead and prepping my black piece of cardstock with my embossing buddy and using Versamark ink to stamp the sentiment. Then I'm taking my gold embossing powder and covering the sentiment, and then I'm going to go and heat emboss it. Most of the elements for my card are now ready to go, so I'm going to go ahead and start assembling. I am attaching the stitched square to the panel, and then I'm going to attach the panel to the card base, which is a piece of Melon Mambo cardstock that I have cut to 8.5 by 4 1/4. So I'll get a 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 inch finished card. I'm just using snail adhesive to attach all this. Then I'm going to take the word window punch and punch out the Celebrate sentiment that I have heat embossed in gold. And once I determine the placement for that, I will use my Stamp-A-Majig to stamp the In Style part of the sentiment and then attach the Celebrate to the card front with some dimensionals. So now I'm going to fussy cut the dress. And I'm not worrying about cutting around some of those lines that just kind of stick out. I'm just making sure that I'm cutting around the main outline, because when I glue this onto the stamped image, you'll be able to see those areas from around the dress. Now I'm taking my fine tip glue pen and I'm applying glue to the stamped image. It's easier than applying it to the dress and then trying to handle the dress. So I'm being somewhat generous but not getting too close to the edges, and then I'm going to lightly press the dress onto the stamped image. And when this is dry, you will not be able to see any gaps or anything. It'll just look like it's all one solid piece. I love how nice paper piecing looks, and I love the polka dots on this dress. Now I'm just flipping my panel over and cutting off the part of the dress that sticks out. To finish off the image, I pulled out my basic gray ink pad and did a little bit of watercoloring on the hat. I attached this square to the front of the card, let it dry completely, and then added a little bit of Wink of Stella, and my card was complete. Back now to creating the frames in a way that is a little bit more challenging. You can create this type of border by masking at a 45-degree angle. So basically you would put one piece of paper or tape like this on the diagonal and then put another one in the opposite direction, creating that 45-degree angle, and then stamp in between. And you would do that for each one of the sides. This can be a little bit tricky to do. For one thing, you have to allow for the area that isn't going to stamp because of the thickness of the paper, and then it's really hard to get it just perfectly lined up. And if the outside of your border frame has little circles or some kind of detail, those are really hard to line up. Now this stamp has a straighter line on the outside, and so I was able to fudge it a little bit with a black marker. And then these I just overlapped without the 45-degree angle, just doing the border at 90-degree angles and masking just straight up and down. And I'm going to show you how to do these. If you have a Misty, this is a good example to use it for. I've already set up my stamp here, and I set it up nice and straight with my ruler, and I've stamped the image onto the grid paper that comes with it. And I'm using a piece of cardstock that is 4 inches by 4 inches, just like before. And one thing that you have to do is you have to mark the outer edge of the border. So I'm just lining up my ruler here. You wouldn't have to do this. You could just mark it on either side, but I'm just using the ruler to mark the edge of the border, and then I'm going to flip the paper over and mark the other side as well. So right where the bottom of my ruler is, that is where my masking paper is going to go, right alongside the bottom of the ruler. I like to use Post-it tape. This tape has adhesive all over the back of it, not just on one end like some of the Post-it notes do, and it's paper, and so when you stamp over it, the ink doesn't pool and smear. If you stamp repeatedly on it, you may get an accumulation of ink, but otherwise it absorbs the ink and is just really nice to work with. I have put the masked piece of cardstock back into the Misty in the position that you can see, inked up the stamp, and stamped the top and bottom of the paper. So now I have half my frame stamped. I'm taking it out, removing the masking, and then I'm going to mask along the sides of the borders that I have already stamped. Then I'm going to take the piece of cardstock and put it back into the Misty, again with the masking to the sides, and then ink up the stamp and stamp the rest of the frame. I didn't get a very good impression on this particular image, so I just inked it up and I'm stamping it a second time. And now when I remove all the masking, you can see how neat the corners turn out. And it is better, like I was saying before, to have the straight line over to the outside and have the scallop edge over to the inside because you get a much crisper image. Now I'm just taking an eraser and erasing my little pencil marks, and my frame is ready to use. Here's an example of a frame that is stamped using a Stamp-A-Majig if you don't have a Misty. I've gone ahead and marked where I want my frame to be, and then I have masked the two sides just like I did before, but then I'm going to use my Stamp-A-Majig to figure out exactly where I want to stamp. And so this method I find a little bit easier than using the Misty when you have a border that has a pattern where, for example, here I want to have the full scallops. I don't want any one of those little scallops to stamp only half. So I'm making sure that I can fit a full number of scallops into the opening. Once I have stamped the one side, I just flip my paper over, use my Stamp-A-Majig again, and stamp the opposite side of the border. For this particular frame, I have decided that I want the sides to overlap just a little bit to give me a little bit of a more pleasing look. So I'm masking partway through the image that I have stamped already, and then again placing my Stamp-A-Majig And because the stamp isn't that long, I am placing it in such a way that I only have to mask one side of the frame. The inside edge of this frame is going to be covered with a piece of cardstock, so I'm really not worried about the fact that I stamped it in red and that I won't be able to erase it. I just wanted to stamp it in red so that I could see better through my Stamp-A-Majig. This is a mini treat bag I put together using Affectionately Yours Specialty Designer Series paper. I was originally going to put it on the piece that has copper foil accents on it, but I didn't have enough, so I did stamp the sentiment with Versamark ink and heat embossed it with copper embossing powder. And I also cut a bow out of the mini treat bag frameless dies set and put that in the middle for a little bit of decoration. I also made a standard A2 card with an image and a sentiment from the Beautiful You stamp set. I used black archival ink to stamp them both onto a piece of white cardstock. And then I used 3 different colors of ink to watercolor the image a little bit. I used Crumb Cake, Flirty Flamingo, which is what I use for the card base and the matting as well, and also a little bit of Tempting Turquoise to kind of make it look like she was dancing in the water. I originally matted the white panel onto black cardstock and then decided I didn't love it. It needed a little bit more, and so I went back and forth but ended up mounting it onto black, then Flirty Flamingo, and then onto a card base made out of Flirty Flamingo. I added a pretty good coating of Wink of Stella to the dress and the hat to add a little bit of shimmer, and debated on adding some sequins or something, but in the end I decided to leave it pretty clean and simple. My last example is pretty much a variation on the previous one, but in this case I'm using a piece of designer series paper that is the size of a card front, so it's 5.5 by 4.25, and I have gone ahead and taped it down so that the center grid lines on my grid paper, which are a little bit thicker than the others, are running down and across the center of my piece of paper. I've also made some pencil marks around the edge of this piece of paper so that when I pick it up and put it back down, I know exactly where it needs to go. And so I'm just basically eyeballing this particular image, and since the stamp doesn't go all the way to the edges of the paper, I'm not worried about masking anything for now. Once I'm done with that one side, I just turn my paper 180 degrees, place it back where it was, and stamp the second long side of the frame. Instead of masking my paper this time, I've decided that I'm going to selectively ink my stamp. So I have cleaned it really well and make sure that it's dry. Now I'm using my Stamp-A-Majig to figure out how many scallops I can fit in the space and overlapping a little bit the other 2 images, and I figured out it's 4 scallops. Then I just take a piece of the Post-it tape and mask at least one of the scallops that I'm not going to need, and then take my ink pad and carefully ink up the scallops that I do want to stamp. Next, I make sure that I remove the Post-it tape, put my Stamp-A-Majig back in place, and stamp my image. I will do the same thing for the other side and my frame will be finished. The paper I used for this card is from the Blooms and Bliss Designer Series paper pack, and the images are from the Big on Birthdays stamp set. I stamped the flowers and leaves in mint macaron, it's all one image, and then the Happy Birthday in Island Indigo. Cut a piece of Island Indigo cardstock to fit just inside the frame, and attached those just with some snail adhesive, and attached all of that to a card base that was also made out of Island Indigo. To embellish the card, I did again a little bit of watercoloring just with Island Indigo on the flowers, and then I added a little bit of Wink of Stella to all of the flowers, even the ones that I had left blank, and a couple of gems in the centers of the larger flowers, and that completed the card. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you would like to see more pictures or purchase any of the products used in this video, please visit my blog at mariascardsandmore.com. Thanks for watching!